Welcome to Now for Someone Completely Interesting. I'm your host, Ben Poulin, and I'm pleased to welcome back, all the way from episode 4 last spring, we talked to Les Parsons. So welcome, Les. Now, the last time you joined me, we talked about your involvement coaching an Olympic gold medalist, as well as continuing your involvement in growing the sport of cross-country skiing locally in the Lakeland area, and kind of the positive impact you want to impart on the youth there. But during that interview, you mentioned venturing to Eastern Canada, where you delved into federal politics. And as always, every time we talk, or every time a mutual friend talks about you, there's a hint of almost like another life that you seem to lead.
Right.
or a new adventure that you're on.
Yeah.
But it's very timely now that Canada is involved in another federal election. We're going to the polls here very shortly. I thought it would be the perfect time to bring you back and maybe share some of those stories and your experiences with federal politics. So once again, thank you for taking the time to join me. So let's start back there. You said you had gone out, it was down east. You were recruited by, at the time, they were the Progressive Conservative Party, which was the precursor to our current Conservative Party of Canada. So how did that all involve? You said it was Jean Charest and Joe Clark actually solicited you. Is that...
Yeah, like I would say, first of all, ding, round 2. Here we are for the second episode with me, and you come out swinging hard there, Ben. Yeah, politics are close to my heart. So it all began when I was in Vermilion, minding my own business. And I got invited a few times to attend some of the Riding Association meetings for Don Mazankowski, who at the time was the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of Finance. So he ran Canada while Mulroney was out gallivanting around the country and singing When Irish Stars Are Smiling with Ronald Reagan. So Maz was a super respected member of Parliament. So he stepped down after that last round in about 1998. I forget the exact year. And there was a void to fill to replace him as member of Parliament. I'd considered at the time running federally because I was interested in Canadian politics, because the root of a lot of our issues are as Canadians. Provincial politics are important, but federal ones are really important.
Right.
So to fill that void, I thought I should jump into that, because I've been quite critical of politics my whole life and politicians. But unless you walk a mile in someone's shoe, you can't really say much. So I just jumped in. But before I went into the election, I thought I better travel to get some world experience. So I went traveling down to Central America for 4 months to get a global perspective on things, and then came back and thought, now I'm ready to go. So I jumped in to that federal election. It's the election where Mulroney stepped down and left Kim Campbell as leader of the party. She was selected as party leader, and it went from 202 seats, probably the greatest majority ever in Canadian politics, down to 2 seats with Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne. And so in that election, I ran as independent. And everybody said to me, we would have voted for you if you would have run for a mainstream party. But we liked what you stood for, get by with less. That was my campaign slogan. And it was based on no promises, just trying to be realistic on what Canadians need. So I campaigned on what I thought would be a good member of Parliament to represent the Lakeland riding. Back then it was called Vermilion Lloydminster.
Okay.
So, Vegreville Lloydminster, because Maz was from Vegreville.
Right.
So I lost that election. I thought to myself, I got to run for a mainstream party. So I chose to run then for the Conservative Party. So the next election, I ran with Jean Charest. And at that time, he was leader of the party, didn't even have a seat. Oh, sorry, he had 1 seat, 2 seats.
Right.
And we took a whomping again. I lost to the Reform Party, who were very popular at the time.
Yeah.
So after that election, I thought I'd try again with Joe Clark. Then after that election, I thought, boy, I'm taking a whomping to the Reform Party, because the Progressive Conservatives were really taking a back seat.
Right.
So then I decided to head. I got to know Jean Charest and Joe Clark, not as best friends, but I got to know them a bit. And they suggested I go to Quebec to make friends with the Bloc Québécois and see what's going on down there. So I moved to Quebec for political reasons, and find a job. I just ended up coaching cross-country skiing. Right. So when I was down there, a fellow called Jim Harris took over the Green Party of Canada as the leader of the party. Okay. And his first mandate was to have 308 candidates to run a viable federal party. So I said, I'm all in. I'm done with the Conservative Party, because they had joined forces with the Reform Party to create the Alliance Party. It was called Canadian Reform Alliance Party. The acronym was CRAP.
I remember that.
Yeah. Okay. So I but there were lots of good people there. So I jumped over then to the Green Party of Canada, because they had a long-term economic platform that was sustainable. The other parties are always running short-term platforms to help your wallet and your purse in the next 2 to 5 years. The Green Party had this long-term economic platform. The problem was, and I still find this to this day, is that they're labeled as tree huggers, environmentalists. But Jim Harris and his after him was Elizabeth May.
Right.
They had a pretty holistic platform that was long-term, that anybody who had kids or grandkids should have considered voting for, because it's a party for the future, not for the present. So I always felt bad. So I ran 3 times for the Green Party of Canada while I was in Quebec, the Parti Vert du Canada, and it was tons of fun. And that was Mulroney's old riding where I ran, Côte Nord. So it was the whole St. Lawrence Seaway region of Havre, St. Pierre, and some really neat, beautiful areas. So I ran there and took a whomping again. And even my friends from Quebec, they gave me money. They put up signs for me. They still voted for the party, or sorry, the Bloc Québécois, but they were all behind me. All my neighbors and friends were like, this is great. So then when I came back to Alberta, I ran one more time against my own cousin, Blaine Hawkins, who is still the member of parliament for Lacombe Red Deer.
Right.
So I ran against him. That would have been about, time slipping here, probably 2009 in the federal election. Took a whomping. To run in rural Alberta for the Green Party is almost a dangerous thing.
It still seems a little bit of I mean, if you're following the political spectrum as it is, the Conservative to the Green Party is about as long as a shift as you can make.
Absolutely.
Well, was it just being, you did kind of mention a little bit fed up with the way the Conservative Party went by amalgamating.
Sure.
Was it some other platform that you disagreed with more so, or was there just more that your views seem to align better with the Green Party at the time?
That's an interesting thing. When Mulroney was there, he had a 202 seat, huge majority in the government. First, he ticked off everybody in Quebec. So then they left. Lucien Bouchard was a minister under Mulroney. Right. He left and started the Bloc Québécois.
Okay.
Then a bunch of other trio, Western conservatives broke off and they formed the Reform Party.
Right.
So Mulroney created 3 parties out of one. But in there was a whole bunch of us conservatives who also had a long-term sustainable focus on the environment. And Tom McMillan, who was a Minister of Environment under Mulroney, was one of the strongest environment ministers of all time in Canada, conservative or liberal.
Right.
So he was the guy that we followed with great confidence, and he defended the government. He defended the environment. He was what you'd call an environmental Minister of Finance. And Elizabeth May actually worked for him in his office. So when the party disintegrated, then a certain segment of the people then went to the Green Party, particularly because a lot of the far, far left people in the Green Party went to the Marijuana Party. So that group, is still going strong, the Marijuana Party. They got what they wanted, I think.
Right.
But so then the Green Party wasn't quite that far left. So it's unfair how they've been labeled over the years. I wish they'd changed their name to the Sustainable Party.
I was going to say, is it maybe in that? But you had mentioned, you before we started recording here, you said something along the lines of a conservative green mandate or conservative. And now that you're outlining this, is that, well, there seem to be a lot of conservatives at the grassroots of the beginning of this party.
Sure.
What did Mulroney do in your mind that disintegrated or ticked off so many people?
I have a lot of respect for him, but I think he got maybe arrogant towards the end of his last term and started to maybe lead with too much power in the Prime Minister's office. Mm-hmm. And that was started by Pierre Elliott Trudeau also, started consolidating power in the Prime Minister's office. And I think that went to Mulroney's, not to his head, but to his style of leadership.
Right.
And I think when you start doing that, you start alienating people, and he just alienated Quebec. He alienated the West. The Reform Party exploded out of nothing. It came from 0 to a lot of seats in a hurry.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
So I think
I kind of remember that. That's when I first started paying attention. I was still quite young, but we all remember Deborah Gray was like the lone Reform member when that party started.
Yeah.
And
the party hardly went. What happened for her is she ran against a fellow called John Dahmer in a federal election. He passed away, I believe, on the night of the election. She campaigned for 2 months, went out, and then won the by-election.
Yes.
Because Preston Manning was thinking about folding up the Reform Party. It was on his last legs.
Right.
They had run 3 elections, didn't win a seat. John Dahmer died for a conservative. Deborah Gray got in, a well-respected gal. I went to the same church as her in Dewberry, a school teacher who was, to this day, one of my most favorite politicians.
Yeah.
Only her and Preston Manning never collected the big pension. They campaigned they would never collect pension and go to the Hogs Trough. And out of all the Reform MPs that said they would do that, they were the only two to never go collect that big pension. Well respected.
Yeah, yeah. And my little connection there too is John Dahmer, who you mentioned there. His wife was my kindergarten teacher.
Okay,
so
definitely Donna Dahmer.
That's right.
I know her really well.
Yes, and I think she ended up running against Deborah Gray.
She did
in the by-election.
That's
as well.
right.
So,
yeah, and a great gal too.
Yeah, and I do Deborah Gray spent a lot of time like one-on-one with people, and I can remember a discussion. I think it was. I want to say my dad had questioned her one time. He's like she had come campaigning around. We owned the bakery in Oak Point.
Okay.
And he wanted her autograph, and she was a little bit embarrassed by that. But he says no, because I want to say I have because he told her she would be the next prime minister, and I know she adamantly said not a chance.
Right.
That she would ever put herself in that position. She kind of had her eye set on just kind of getting the party up and running like that. But do you think, if the Reform Party ever put her in that leadership position instead of Preston Manning, do you think that she might have advanced it further than it went?
I believe she would have, because she came from a school teacher background, a very, like your father said, a real communications minded, personable background. I think not being fluent in French probably would have been a strike against her. But she was well respected. Mazinkowski liked her, even though he disagreed with her tremendously on philosophy.
Right.
There's a lot of respect there. And Maz, too, is well respected. These are what you would call, respected politicians, the Joe Clarks, the Robert Stanfield, who most of your older listeners would know, were the real diplomats. Lester B. Pearson, all these people were really well respected diplomatic people that were, just good people, good leaders.
I want to come back then now to so Brian Mulroney leaves, and I like to think he might have seen the writing on the wall, so jump off the sinking ship kind of thing, and let poor Kim Campbell deal with the consequences.
They called her the 42nd prime minister, and it just been longer than 40 seconds.
Yeah, just enough to say you were the first female prime minister of Canada.
Yeah.
But when you allude to it, there was a lot more power being allocated to the prime minister's office. Do you think, had he maybe pump the brakes on that or something, do you think it's had a continual effect to the way the country's run now? Because I kind of think it does. I kind of think the prime minister, as we sit now, no matter which party is going to get in this next election here, that they have too much power in that seat.
Way too much power. You nailed it, Ben. In fact, tonight is the English national leaders debate, and a lot of Canadians are watching that, and I think it's okay to watch that. It's okay to follow that. But when they go to vote at the polls, they won't see Justin Trudeau's name on their ballot. They won't see Aaron O'Toole, Jagmeet Singh, Anna May Paul. They won't see those names on the ballot. So I think there's so much emphasis now on what the prime minister says and what the leader says. But really, you can only vote for your local candidate. There's 338 people, in each party running. And I think it's got to the point now where the media have made these people to have too much power. They've created too much influence, and I think the media is focused so much on this leaders race and on the leaders, and they hardly report on your local candidates, that it's gone. People like yourself out in the frontline trenches, or Lakeland Today, our local newspaper, or Lakeland Connect, or local media people. They're covering the local scene, but really it's got way out of balance where the prime minister can call the shots. And Trudeau Jr., he's got a ton of influence over and control over what happens with his cabinet and the direction the party goes.
I'm trying to formulate this the right way. Thinking of an idea here. You mentioned your first time running into politics. You ran as an independent.
Yep.
I've often thought, especially in the last year or so, I've become, I won't say what it was, but I had my party preference per se, the way I voted.
Sure.
Now I really am disappointed with the way things are. There's a lot of finger pointing.
Yeah.
They seem more along the lines of pointing at the opposition and where their shortcomings are, rather than how they can benefit. They're showing us problems, not solutions. Let's put it that way. I've often thought over the last year or so that we should somehow find a way to dissolve the party process. And if every riding ran as independents and had maybe sort of a collective government where your MPs get together, then vote a cabinet in to their liking and not deal with the party. Is that even something that's remotely possible in today's parliamentary standards that we've set over the last 150 years in this country.
Right. It's totally possible in democracy. And what you're highlighting is what a lot of my friends talk about is the failure of partisan politics or party politics. They aren't serving Canadians. It serves the needs of the party where you toe the party line. And it's broken. The system is completely broken to the point where in the last federal election, only 67% of Canadians voted. 33% didn't vote.
Yeah.
Some people say that the apathy party won that election. That's the largest group of voters in the last federal election. I would think they're people that have lost hope. I wouldn't say Canadians are apathetic. Right. They've lost hope and wonder what difference does their vote make, and they don't show up to vote. So you're one of many people like myself that if we had somebody in Lakeland riding run to represent us without a party name behind him, just plain Jane versus Joe Blow versus Hubert, whatever, and then we selected the best leader from that group, we would have true representation without towing the party lines.
Exactly. And go back to your first time running, how many people said, I would have voted for you, but you weren't running for a mainstream party?
Many people.
So even if you're not, let's put this into context too, because some people have said, and there are certain ridings out there that have elected independents.
Yeah.
How effective is it? You're the lone seat in this sea of basically, let's illustrate it as you're a little dinghy in a sea of battleships.
Yeah.
What difference can you make as an independent party member if you were elected in that manner?
Not a lot. Even Elizabeth May sat as the lone Green MP. So she was a lone wolf in the distance, in the very back row in Parliament, in the House of Commons, who got to speak once in a while. She got Parliamentarian of the Year 3 times. She won some awards for being representative of her West Coast or left coast riding out there, Vancouver Island, that whole area. But, it's a real tough go. But then Mazinkowski himself would say he's not sure what difference he made even when he was in politics. He went in with some ideals as a small businessman out of Innisfree, Alberta and Vegreville, without any kind of education or training and jumped in there. And probably to this day would wonder how much difference did he really make in party politics? Because they started towing party lines probably mostly under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That's when it really took off, the partisan politics. It got personal with him and Jean Chrétien versus, Robert Stanfield, and then it escalated worse with Mulroney. And it's really become divisive, even provincially. You got our Conservative Party now is trying to undo everything Rachel Notley had done. Right. And she tried to undo everything that the previous Conservative government did. And it's partisan politics, and it's not serving you or I, and it's certainly not serving your kids. Right. That's what I'm worried about. When people go to vote, they should vote for their kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews and not their own wallet. Right.
Let's go back a little bit. Some of your campaigns. What's something memorable that you experienced in any one of your campaigns that you did? You told us you took a shellacking, so I'm assuming you didn't have a seat in the House of Commons at any point. But what did you take from those experiences, or what's something that stands out for you?
That's a nice way to say it took a shellacking. I took a whomping. I had doors slammed in my face. People, swear at me, threaten me to get off their driveway or off their farm. There were some pretty rude people, but I don't want to pin it that way. I always say that 95% of the people were quite positive, curious. Why are you running? What are you doing this for? Because a lot of people knew me then in the region. Right. And some felt sorry for me. Some would just give me $100 cash, say good luck. It was, to me, it was a positive experience. You have to have thick skin. I would imagine. Because people attack you personally for whatever party you're running with. Independently, you weren't a threat. So people were more or less pretty good. But once I chose to run for the old progressive Conservatives, then I was a threat to the NDP and the Liberals. And it was a really, great experience. I would encourage people to do it, and at least gave me a lot of respect for those who are running now. So now we've got 6 people running here in Lakeland. I've got respect for all 6 of them to put their name out there publicly and stand up. And I believe these are really good people. Anybody who's willing to serve, their country are good. And, in fact, right now, it's to the point where people ask me, Les, who do we vote for? Who are you going to vote for? And I said, I'm going to vote for the best person to represent me and Lakeland. I'm not voting for Aaron O'Toole or Jagmeet Singh or any of these people. I'm voting for who's going to represent me the best.
That's kind of been my default in the last couple of years, that whether it's been federally or provincially or obviously municipal party politics don't play in, but that's kind of how I start to view it a little bit. And back on the line of why would somebody do this? And I've said, I like how you pointed it out, being critical of a politician, but until you walk a mile in the street, you couldn't pay me enough. to be in that position.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now,
Yeah.
whether you're municipal, provincial, federally, not a chance. I'll sit back and be the hypocrite who criticizes, but you'll never see me knocking on the doors because what if I got elected? Then I'd really be in the hot seat.
Sure.
And, the pressure really is on at that point. So.
Absolutely. And, you know, when I was a kid, it was a very respected thing. Gordon Towers was a member of parliament, a well-respected fellow out of Lacombe and, you know, super Canadian. But nowadays, the reputation of politicians is pretty bad. People are quick to cuss you and look down their nose at you. They've got a bad reputation. And I believe that's because of partisan politics and breaking promises. They made all these promises. They have the red book for the Liberals and the blue book for the Conservatives and the orange book for the NDP. But, you know, they just don't deliver. And so they're getting worse and worse reputations every election. You know, the one I kind of wished had a crack at it would have been Jack Layton. I really liked Jack. Principled, honest guy. And if he hadn't have died, I kind of think he might have won that election that was up with Trudeau and Harper. If he'd have been alive at the time, he would have won that instead of Thomas Mulcair.
I wonder sometimes too, because he brought that party farther than it had ever been. But I wonder sometimes too, did the reputation of the NDP stall it?
It might have, yeah.
If he had ran under any other party,
probably
a landslide. Because I definitely have to agree with that. He did stand out in that sense. So I wonder if he just maybe didn't have the
maybe the right party for that guy.
The partisan. It was the right party for him. I'd have to say that.
Sure, it was.
But for the country itself, I think a lot of people who never thought themselves to vote for that party voted because of him. So that's a lot of credit on that. So I have to agree there.
And his predecessor, Ed Broadbent, was another principled, great Canadian. He's still alive, probably 90 years old, but a great guy. But then again, Ben, the NDP won in Alberta like a few years ago. So I think maybe Jack would have got a lot of votes in. He already had some seats in Saskatchewan. He might have done better than we think. People were fed up, and a lot of times these votes are also protest votes. So the reform vote was a protest vote from the West. The bloc vote was a protest vote from Quebec. So there's all these protest votes that are there with parties that are fed up with the status quo.
Just my opinion, the situation where the provincial NDPs in Alberta, I think, was ultimately a protest
Absolutely,
vote. That's just my opinion on that one.
And it might swing back. If there's enough protest vote against Kenny, we could have a protest vote back to the NDP.
There's a lot of ticked off people in the
There
province,
is. There is.
Back to thinking about thick skin. Was there ever a party you encountered that either exists or doesn't exist anymore, speaking of thick skin, that really stood out with you over the years?
Oh, for sure. There was older people who are maybe 60 and older would remember something called the Rhinoceros Party of Canada. And it was a comedy party, be like Rick Mercer kind of stuff, like pure comedy. I think they wanted to move the Rocky Mountains to Saskatchewan and the Great Lakes up to Northwest Territories. And they had some really radical, crazy ideas. And they might have even run some candidates, I believe. Have to look on the computer and see if you could find that. But, people do have a sense of humor. And I would think if it existed right now, it might get a lot of traction because people are so fed up, and people have said to me they're not going to vote this election.
What were some of the names behind that party?
I don't know the names of anybody. It's just the Rhino Party or Rhinoceros Party, and it's just Google it. And it's a ton of fun.
Let's. I'm going to tag it in my notes or hashtag it and see if we can reach out and maybe now's the time. Strike while the iron's hot.
It would be if the number of people like 22 Minutes or Air Farce or those kind of people would probably vote for a Rhino Party right now because they're so disillusioned with stuff.
I feel I might, to be honest.
Yeah, it would probably get a lot of votes again as a protest vote. So it's a tricky one. Now the other extreme of this thing is I had Justin Trudeau on a 2-week canoe trip with me on the Nahanni River.
Okay.
About 10 years ago, just after he finished teaching drama on Vancouver Island.
Right.
Tried a year of engineering school. It didn't work for him. And so he came on a 2-week Nahanni River trip with me down the river. I was the guide with some other friends, and we had Trudeau and a few other, Jerry Butts, his chief of staff, who got busted and thrown out over SNC Lavalin with Judy Wilson-Raybould and that whole thing. So I got to see Trudeau firsthand for a couple of weeks, 24/7. They had CBC with us and big television cameras, mics as big as your microphones here, and the whole thing. And that was a really eye-opener to see. Back then, he wasn't running yet. He was just sort of looking for the next thing to do. His father had died, recently.
Right.
He spoke at his father's funeral, which was quite if people look at that speech, you could tell he was probably thinking about politics. It was a very charismatic speech. And I saw right there, the guy's got charisma.
Right.
Like he can charm people, and he was charming as the day is long on our canoe trip. When the camera light was on, the red light on the camera, and they were filming, he was something else. So lots of charisma, lots of energy that he could put out there. Maybe not as much substance as I think you know a prime minister would have. And to this day, I think the only reason he's prime minister right now is his last name is Trudeau. That just the name familiarity that he's there because of his father's name. If he was just Justin Smith, probably wouldn't have won. But that there's a strong sentiment for the great prime minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
So there yet another federal connection here that you brought up that I didn't know about. So
I had the prime minister on a 2-week canoe trip before he's prime minister, and it was just gives you good insight into the fellow. Nice guy, like a good guy.
So at the time, you know, you have plausibility as to why the canoe didn't tip over and him with it. But
well,
you also had the camera.
People have said, Parsons, you could have changed history of Canada by just flipping him over above the big waterfalls and let him go. You let us down. You could have done one for the team, especially here in Alberta. You know, he's just not popular out here at all. And
not a bit.
The charismas wore off. Like it worked for the first election. He squeaked through in the second election of the minority, but I think the charisma has worn off. Even in Quebec, it's wore off. So, yeah, I can't predict. The polls, I don't know what to think about. They say dogs know best what to do with polls.
That's right.
They pee on them. So absolutely. I don't know what's going to happen at all.
The only one that counts is the ones on voting day.
Exactly,
yeah. Once again, Les, this was very entertaining and informative. Very enlightening, too, to the insides of politics and not your general run-of-the-mill answer the question and dance around the issue speech. I like how you kind of hit it hard here for us.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to do this again because I'm sporting this little lengthy beard here.
Yeah.
And you made mention of something about you were in Pakistan, had to grow a beard out so you can get into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that.
I think there's a whole other. Once again.
But I appreciate this topic. And I hope that people do go find out what the local candidates are up to, what they're running for.
Absolutely.
They don't have many in-person forums, which I really regret. They're going to have these online forums. But I really believe people should get off their butt, get out there and research who's running and vote for them regardless of their party.
And not just this time around, but every subsequent election. I think we got to start really thinking about maybe dissolving the power of the parties, maybe not the parties themselves. I don't know if that's possible, but really thinking about how they how much clout they bring to the table. I
agree with you. And if they ever go back to the independent thing, I'd be the first guy to put my name on the ballot. I would love to run as an independent again and represent people.
There you go. I'd look forward to it. I would vote for you and not just say,
I got one vote.
And not just out of obligation for being a 2-time guest. So thanks so much again, Les Parsons. Like I said last time, less is more. One last question here. This is something I started doing with my podcast, and I didn't give you a warning about this.
Sure, no worries.
What I've been asking my guests is if you could think of someone that you know that you think would be completely interesting for my listeners to hear from, is there a name that comes to mind that you would pick?
Well, I'm big fans of Pierre and Joanne Lamoureux. These people are just community-minded people. They're movers and shakers. They're a lot of fun. They bust their butts for community. They're about family, community, small town, local economy, chamber of commerce, everything that encapsulates small town.
And perfect people I know very well, so I'll be sure, because actually Pierre is the one who strongly recommended you the first time around.
This is payback time. I'm recommending him and Joanne.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I've already asked him. He hasn't said no, but I think he needs to think about it. So now we're going to put the pressure on. So thank you so much.
You bet, Ben.
Again, this is Les Parsons. Now for someone completely interesting. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like and a share. Find us on your favorite podcast provider. And don't forget to like and share with us and spread the message here of Now for Someone Completely Interesting. Thank you so much, Les.